Oh, it's so good to be in God's house with God's people, in God's presence, and hearing God's word, isn't it? It's such a joy and a privilege. The opening chapters, really the first 7 chapters up until now, have introduced us to Samuel, a very unique and important character in the Bible, person in the history of Israel. And we see him raised up for a great hour of need in a very dark time in Israel's history. He was a unique person because he was the last of the judges. He was also a faithful priest, and he was established as a prophet over Israel. And the time that he emerges is that right at the end of the period of the judges, about 400 years or so. And this was a time where there was a lot of idolatry and unbelief and corruption in the priesthood and things like that. And Samuel would stand out as a bright, shining light during this time. We remember just in the last chapter how he was used to help bring the people back to the Lord, to return to the Lord in repentance. That's in 7 verse 3. He says, if you return to the Lord with all your hearts, and then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths from among you, and prepare your hearts for the Lord, and serve him only, he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. And the people responded, and God gave them victory over the Philistines. And we surfaced that principle, didn't we? That some people say, well, why isn't God answering me? Why isn't God delivering me? But there is a prerequisite in that verse. If you return to the Lord with all your hearts and get rid of these idols and serve the Lord only, then he will deliver you. God is not like a vending machine to bend to our every whim and need, but he wants more. He wants a relationship. He wants our hearts. But they responded, and it's amazing. They get that victory. But here in chapter 8, we're going to see a transition now. It's a transition from the period of judges to the period of kings, from judgeship to kingship, from theocracy to monarchy, from having God as their king to having the kingship be among men. And in fact, Samuel himself is going to be used to anoint the first of those kings, if you remember Saul and David. So here in chapter 8, we're introduced to Samuel's own sons. Let's go to the text together. Now it came to pass when Samuel was old or older, and of course he's actually present through the rest of this book. He doesn't die until chapter 25. But when he was old or older, he made his sons judges over Israel. Now, Samuel was an incredible man of faith and a man of God, but this really is not a wise move that he makes here. It says here that he made his sons judges. But there's no example in the book of Judges that men ever made a man a judge. It was always God who raised up a judge in his time, and the Spirit of the Lord would come upon that person for that hour or for that time. The office of a judge was never passed on from father to son. It was really based on the sovereign call and appointment of God. It happened with the priests and it will happen with the kings, that it was through the lineage but not through the judges. So this is Samuel's choice, and it's really not a good one. We can sometimes even see this in churches, or especially big ministries that were raised up at a certain time, and a man who was very gifted, and there's an incredible work, and then the temptation will be to pass that on to his son. And is that right or is that wrong? Well, it depends, doesn't it? It depends. Is he gifted? Is he called? Is he anointed for the ministry? Is God leading that way? But certainly it's not just through genetics or because he bears the same name. But it really should be based on the work and the calling of God. I remember being in a church and the founding pastor was getting old, like Samuel was. And there began to be the conversation, well, who's going to be the successor? And he had his son, his physical son, who was also in the ministry. And then there was another man who was a clear disciple, and both of these were being considered. And in the end, there was the leaning towards choosing his son, and it got messy, and it wasn't a happy ending, because really he wasn't called, he wasn't fitted, he was really soulish, he had the wrong intent and desire. So you have to be so careful with that. And Samuel really made not a good decision here. It says the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second Abijah. Joel means Yahweh is God. And Abijah means my divine father is Yahweh. So it's interesting that Samuel, even in giving their names, there was a message and a hope perhaps in giving them those names, but they didn't represent those names well. Let's look at verse 3. But his sons did not walk in his ways. We'll actually see this phrase as we go into the books of Kings also. There was a king, and then he would have a son, and it would say, but his son did not walk in the ways of his father David, or whatever. Or he walked in the ways of Jeroboam, who caused Israel to sin. And there were those comparisons. That phrase echoes through that book, and we read it here also. He did not walk in his ways. There were some good kings who had sons who were bad, some bad kings who had sons who were good. And Samuel, as amazing as he was, he had sons that, let's look at the rest of the verse there. They turned aside after dishonest gain, and they took bribes, and they perverted justice. They were clearly violating the Mosaic law and using their position and the power that would come with that to exploit people and to benefit their own needs. And anyone who has a position or power but not the right heart that goes with it, watch out, because people really can get hurt, because people can abuse their position and their authority, and they're not using it to serve others but to serve their own interests. So this went on for some time, and finally something had to be done about it. So we read verse 4, then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. This was quite a showdown. All of the elders, it had obviously been going on for a while, they'd been talking, they were concerned, what shall we do? This can't continue. We have to go and confront Samuel. So that's what they did. And in fact, that was a good move. That was the right thing to do. Not to talk this way and make an issue of it, but just go straight to Samuel with the elders and address the issue. And that's what they did. And they said in verse 5, look, you are old. Now, it's probably not a good way to start a meeting or a conversation or address the need there. If you want to be a bit more diplomatic than that, but it was true. But they said, look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. His sons were not representing him well, or the Lord, or particularly the priesthood, of course. And it couldn't continue. And to that point, they were right. They went to Samuel, they pointed out the error, but their request was not a good one, as we see. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. Samuel's choice was not good, to make his sons judges, and their choice here is also not fitting. Now, the scripture did predict that there would be a monarchy. In fact, even in the book of Judges, right before this, in chapter 17, 18, 19, and the last chapter 21, has this phrase, but there was no king of Israel in those days. So it's prepping us, it's setting us up for the fact that the monarchy would come. The tribe of Judah was promised that the royal lineage would be through Judah. So there was an anticipation that the kings would come and prepare us for the ultimate king, the Messiah who would come, Jesus himself. But this request was the wrong motive, the wrong reason, the wrong time, and the wrong choice. in the book of Judges, the people oppressed the leaders to be kings before. Notably, Gideon, after the victory, they came and they said, "We want to make you king over us." And he replies, 8:23 of Judges, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." So Gideon wasn't having any of it. He pushed back. But Abimelech in Judges 9 actually conspired to make himself king, and God had to bring the men of Shechem against him, etc. Again, because it was not God's timing or his will or his way, and certainly not his man. What these elders really should have done with Samuel was prayed to the Lord for his answer and his guidance and his appointment, but we don't have that. One writer said about this that they held a committee meeting instead of a prayer meeting. And that's a good point, isn't it? We don't see that God was consulted in this. So, this was really a natural request and not a spiritual one. And it says the reason there is they wanted to be like the other nations. And of course, this is ironic because God's purpose for Israel was that they would be set apart from the nations, that they would be different. Leviticus 20:26, "I have set you apart from the nations to be my own." And yet they wanted to be like the other nations. And I wonder how many Christians or even churches have stumbled at this point, wanting to be more like the world, and wanting even to adopt the methods or the ways of the world and bring that into the church without care or without prayer. And that can often not work well. We are called to be different, to be set apart, to be an example, to be a light. It's not about being really cool, although you happen to have a really... No, I'm just kidding. Hey, my wife laughed. She laughed the loudest. Hey. But we are called to be set apart. Now, if they were patient and they waited, perhaps God would have given his man, a man after his own heart, in his way, as we see in David. But they did not wait. So with this request, we read verse 6 there, "And the thing displeased Samuel when they said, 'Give us a king to judge us.'" It displeased him. Well, perhaps he didn't like the fact that they rejected his sons, but it seems that he really saw that their motive and the request was not fitting. So what did he do? And this is a good note. Put it in your pipe and smoke it for a while. This principle is a good one. "And so Samuel prayed to the Lord." Isn't that good? He was displeased. The situation was not good. And what did he do? He prayed to the Lord. Oh, that's so good. Look to the Lord in prayer. Before you act or before you react, before you speak, before you put your hands all over it to deal with it, speak to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, verse 7, "Heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you." Oh, wait, that's unexpected. Perhaps Samuel did not expect that answer, but God says, he basically is saying, give them what they are asking for. Right? Heed the voice of the people. And maybe you've been in a situation like that. I have in church situations where there is a bit of drama and pride and conflict, and you go to prayer and you just know that that's not right, the way it's being handled, and the Lord says, let it go. Let it happen. Let them have it. Walk away. And maybe sometimes God will do that. And there's consequences that comes with the choice, but sometimes God lets you have it. And that's a principle that is laid at the feet of our own lives as Christians, that sometimes God may let you have what you want. But he will be faithful if you have an ear to hear. He'll be faithful to speak and guide you and lead you if you're willing to hear. And if you are, it may save you from some heartache. Because sometimes we can be a bit blind in our stubbornness or in our natural thinking, and we want counsel, but sometimes we only want counsel if it agrees with what we've already decided we want to do. right? And if you want to find counselors that will agree with you, you can do with that. You can do that, but that's maybe not what we need. We need, like Samuel was told to do, people who will solemnly warn us. You can choose that, you can have that, but it really should come with a warning. So God explains exactly what's happening. Look there in verse 7. They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. And God really there cuts right to the heart of the issue. What's really happening is that the people are, it could be cloaked in this noble idea of we want a king, but God says, cuts right to the issue, they're rejecting me from reigning over them. That's the bottom line. That maybe they want a king that they think perhaps that they can pull the strings, or they have a certain relationship with, but they don't want to submit to me. Look at the phrasing there, that I should not reign over them. And this was not new for Israel. Look at this, verse 8. According to the works which they have done since the day I brought them out of Egypt. God is saying this isn't new. This has always surfaced in their history, and so it does in the church too. There is a resistance to the authority, the will, the person of God, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, and Samuel, so they are doing to you also. They maybe have their perspective of what this will mean if they have a king, and they are ready to make that decision. Moses himself was rejected, Joseph, of course, and Jesus, all rejected when there was that idea of one who would lead over them or reign over them. And let me just surface a little principle here. Maybe it helps, or it's insightful. They're rejecting Samuel, who is the prophet, and they're ready to choose a king, who will be Saul, of course. And what's the difference between a prophet and a king? A king, there will be rules in the kingdom. There will be certain things that you have to do to comply and be successful, etc., and accepted in the kingdom. It's a system that you can function in and under. But the prophet is different. The prophet, his job is to make you personally accountable to walk with God. Now, the picture of the king could be, well, listen, maybe I find a church and I go on a Sunday and they don't really teach the Bible. I'm not really confronted. I had never even heard the phrase, take up my cross or be a disciple. I just hear these little Bible readings and phrases, and we sing some hymns, and I go and live the rest of my week. And I don't really think about God until the next Sunday. I can do that. Give me a few rules and things that I can do and things that I can't do as a Christian. I'll do that and my conscience will be appeased, and there we go. That's like asking for a king, a puppet king that you can manage. But the prophet is different. The prophet speaks the words of God and makes you personally accountable to walk with God. Oh, that's different. But the flesh doesn't like to die. The flesh wants to live. Verse 9. Now therefore, here God says, for the second time, heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them. And have you ever had anyone in your life who has solemnly warned you? Forewarned you? I have. Anyone else? Right? Maybe that's the job of a pastor or a counselor sometimes, to forewarn you. Listen, you're free to make your choice. I'm not your judge, and I can't tell you what to do. I don't know God's will for your life, but I could solemnly forewarn you according to the scriptures. And I remember in Budapest there was, situations like this about people who would ask about, a job or a relationship, getting married to an unbeliever and those types of things. And they're free to make those choices. But I also feel the onus on me out of love for them. You can do that, but This is what the scriptures say. And it might come at a price. And it seems wonderful now, and you can hear the wedding bells, and it seems great. But down the road, it may be very, very hard and very painful. So, God is ready to give them their request. It's Psalm 106:15 says, He gave them their request, but sent leanness into their soul. You can have what you want, but maybe it doesn't come with a spiritual blessing in that way. Verse 10, so Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king. And he said, this will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons. And as you read this passage, he says he will take 6 times. He will take the best. He will take, he will take, he will take. You can have the king, you can choose it, but have your eyes wide open. He will take your sons. Oh, imagine. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots. Verse 12. He will also appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his 50s. He will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make weapons of war and equip for his chariots. The king will need to build an army. And guess how he's going to do that? Your sons. He will take your sons. Verse 13. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. There'll be various ways to serve the king in his growing kingdom and palace and grounds and staff and all of that. Cooks and bakers, and you know where he'll get them? Your daughters he will take. Verse 14. No, there it is. Verse 14. He will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. He will take the best. The king is not going to take the worst. He's going to take the best of all of your fields and your crops. What and it's going to that's going to be part of the price. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officers and his servants. This is talking about the taxes that will be laid out in the kingdom. You will be taxed heavily. And be careful before you it's almost like we could make the application a little bit to politics and voting. Oh, when he's in, everything's going to be great, really. Or maybe down the road you realize it wasn't, quite a rosy picture as you thought. And that is, when you get older and you've been through some elections, you realize there's no perfect version, and you have to really have your eyes wide open. I'm not getting political. That's a principle. He will take it. Verse 15. Yeah. Verse 16. So he will take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage and give it to your officers. That's verse 15. Well, where is he going to get? He's going to give that to his servants. And where is he going to get his servants from? He will take your male servants and your female servants, your finest young men and your donkeys, and put them to his work. Where's he going to get his servants from? He's going to take yours, and he's going to put them to his work. And he will take, verse 17, he will take 1/10 of your sheep. And then here is the crowning phrase, and you will be his servants. You will be his servants. Overall, you'll all pay a price of serving this king at his own good pleasure and his own bidding. Now that might be okay if it's a perfect king, if it's a gracious king, if it's Jesus. But if it's not, if it's a fallen man who is soulish and selfish, and then you're going to feel that. And what's going to happen in verse 18 is you will cry out in that day. And this is a prophecy. This is not, and if you do, or maybe you will cry out in that day. And this phrase, if you remember, is echoed all the way through Judges. Remember we speak about that cycle that you see in Judges? That the people sinned, and then God brought the enemy against them, and they were in servitude, and then the people cried out in supplication, and then God raised up a judge to deliver them and bring them salvation, so to speak. And then they had silence or rest or peace again but they had to cry out in that time where the enemy was upon them. It says the people cried out. And what happened? God heard them, and he raised up a judge, and he answered them. But look what he says here. You will cry out in that day because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Notice the wording here. You will cry out in that day because of your king, who you have chosen for yourselves. There's quite an emphasis there, isn't it? Your choice, your king for yourself. You made the choice. You will cry out. And I'm telling you ahead of time, I'm not going to raise up a judge. I'm not going to answer in that day. You're going to have to face those consequences. That's a solemn, clear warning, isn't it? And sometimes the truth in love is hard to say, but it's love that maybe helps you to say that, to communicate that to someone. Oh, I remember having people who sadly took it the wrong way or got offended, and then years later came back and said, I'm sorry, you were right. That's hard. But he solemnly warned them. I'm sure that was one of the hardest things for Samuel to say these words, that you will cry out and the Lord will not hear you in that day. It's kind of like saying, listen, if you're not going to hear me in this day, then God's not going to hear you in that day. You need to listen. So that serious, solemn warning, verse 19, nevertheless. That's an unfortunate word. Nevertheless means despite everything that just happened or everything that was just said, nevertheless, it says the people refused to obey. Again, that strong words there. It's not, they failed to hear. It doesn't say that. It says they refused to obey the voice of Samuel. And they said, no, but we will have a king over us. Oh, you hear that and you think, oh Lord, please give me the humility and the wisdom to hear solemn warnings or people who would speak to me in love but directly. Help me to hear that and to see that. And again, they give their reasoning that we may be like all the nations and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Now, what's incredible about that phrase is we just studied chapter 7, where God did go before them and brought an incredible victory over them through the thunderings from heaven. He defeated their enemy when they turned back to them, gave them this unbelievable victory, and they had the stone that they built, and there was praise and sacrifice and thankfulness. And then they say, we want to choose a king who will go out before us and fight our battles. A king that we can see, a king like the other kings. We don't want to feel the squeeze and we're waiting to the last minute thinking, where's the victory going to be? And praying to the prophet and praying to the Lord. And at the last minute, God comes and saves us every time. We want a king who is building an army and secure and everyone can see him and he'll go out and fight our battles. Where there is not really faith in the Lord, but trusting in horses and chariots instead of trusting in the Lord. And Samuel heard, verse 21, all the words of the people, and he repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. And here we have for the third time, the Lord said to Samuel, heed their voice and make them a king. And Samuel said to the men of Israel, every man go to his city. And the elders, go back, return. Okay, it's over. You're going to get what you've asked for. And the principle for us left in our heart is we pray that God would help us. We can have that, well, in Hebrews, where it warns against the hardened heart, but hear and respond to him, that you may enter in, that the word may profit you that is heard. Hebrews 4:2. Hebrews 4:1, the warning, take heed, unless that word that is spoken to you, you hear it, but it does not profit you, because it is not mixed with faith. So we finished this morning by saying, oh Lord, may we hear, may we have the wisdom and the humility to respond and obey, and let just a gentle word convict us. May we not need a solemn warning, but just a gentle word would correct our hearts, and we would have our trust in the Lord, and he will show his hand strong for us in his timing, in his way, and he will fight our battles for us.